You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike.
Welcome into the Psych with Mike Library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan.
And I'm Brett Newcomb.
How are you this morning?
I am great. How are you?
I am fantastic. We want to really be open to people when they give us feedback.
Yes.
And so if you give us feedback, there are a couple of things. I can guarantee
If we like what you have to say,
Yeah.
we'll try to respond to it in one of our podcasts. If we don't like it, we'll pretend we didn't get it.
Well, yes. No, we're going to try and respond, I mean, appropriately. I mean, there's sometimes when it doesn't need a response. But if you ask us a question, then we try and track that and we try and be responsive. And so we were doing a podcast on the biology of emotion, and somebody had said, okay, yes, I get that. That sounds fantastic. And I don't know if we should identify people, so I'm not going to.
No,
but
I don't think
but
we
and then somebody had asked, hey, what is it? What is the process for when I'm having an emotion that makes it so difficult for me to think clearly?
The biological process.
Yeah.
What's going to happen to my body that interferes with my ability to
Right.
think?
And you know, it kind of made me flashback to how many times I've had a conversation with a parent where they will be talking about their child and they'll be telling me about how they had this just really gut-wrenching emotional altercation with their child, and the way that they try and extricate themselves from that situation is they say, hey, go do your homework. And I say, that's horrible. That's a horrible thing to do.
Well, but we should clarify here that the emotional meltdown can come from either participant. I have a little 3-year-old girl that lives next door to me. She was in the backyard the other day, and she had a blue screaming fit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she was out of control. Saw her later in the afternoon with her mother in the backyard, and we were chatting. And I said, "Oh, you okay now?"
Mm-hmm.
And her mother smiled at me and looked at the little girl and said, "Tell him what happened. Tell him why you were upset." And the little girl looks at me, and she said, "Well, things happened."
They did. They happened.
So her mother tells me they have a doggy door in the basement, and their dog can come and go, and they don't have to let it out.
Mm-hmm.
Dog knows how to use it. Little girl knows how to use it. She wanted to come outside,
no.
and the parents said, "No, you can't go outside." She's like, "Yeah, okay." So she went down the basement and went out through the doggy door. So they caught her, and she got in trouble, and she didn't want to be in trouble, and she threw a fit. So when she knew I was asking about it, she was like, "Things happened."
and does she know what you do for a living?
No, she's 3 years old.
She's 3, so she might not be able to understand that. But so yes, things happen, and we have reactions to the things that happen,
Yes.
and a lot of times we experience that as emotion, and we've talked about that, the biology of that, and how for me, biologically, I see that as primarily a hormonal release in the body that causes the body to change.
And I agree that all happens
And-
continuously.
Yeah. And right, I know you don't disagree with the biology.
Yeah.
You don't emphasize it as much as I do. But then when we think about, so how does that then interplay with us being able to have a conversation that is rational? So one of the things that I tell my clients all the time, let me just get this in and I'll come back to you, and I have them repeat back to me a lot, is you cannot have a rational conversation with an irrational person. That is impossible.
I would agree.
And so if you can recognize that,
And if you happen to be irrational,
then
yeah,
right. And so when you are having an emotional, so the first tier of this is when you are having an emotional reaction, you are by definition irrational. And we're going to explain why that is. But I want to come back to what you were going to say.
well, that is what I was going to say. You can be irrational when you get flooded with emotion, and all your biology then is firing in your system, and the hormones and the intensity. Whether you call it anxiety or rage. And when we work with people who have rage problems, we try to teach them gradations of anger so that they can learn to recognize what their body's doing
Right.
before they get to the point that they have a meltdown. So if I can recognize that I'm clenching my teeth and popping the muscle in my jaw. Now, the people who live with me will know that.
Right.
I mean, I could know minutes before it was going to happen that my father was going to have a meltdown.
And let me interject right here.
Yeah.
So they will know.
Right.
They may not even be conscious. They may not be able to explain it like that.
Right.
They may not be able
Right.
to say, "Well, you just clenched your teeth, and I saw
Right.
that muscle pop."
So we want to
but they
teach
will
them.
unconsciously know.
And-
Absolutely.
And when you do family counseling, you work on all of those dynamics within the family so that people come to realize they do know when Joey is about to go over the edge. And sometimes they push him over the edge on purpose because they get off on it. And sometimes they're just blindsided, like, oh my God, what happened to Joey? Why did he go so crazy over that? Well, sometimes it's not over that. It's been building. It's over a number of things, and you may not know what they are. Maybe his girlfriend broke up with him. Maybe he got sent to the principal at school. Maybe he got an F on a test, and he comes home and he's trying to do his homework, and his pencil keeps breaking.
Right.
And all of a sudden, he's throwing the pencil at the wall, and you're like, why are you so angry?
doing that? Yeah.
Well, my pencil broke.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can't get my pencil to work. I remember one year when I was teaching high school, at the end of the semester, I was going through and working out and telling the kids what their grades were going to be because report cards were going home, and I wanted them to know, no surprises, this is the grade that you have earned. And kid found out he wasn't going to pass the class, and he screamed an obscenity and hurled his American history book over the rest of the kids' heads and bounced it off the wall. Just boom, pow. And then he said, "You failed me." And I said, "No, I didn't fail you. You worked really hard to fail. It's almost impossible to fail. You worked at it. Let's sit down and talk about it." Well, he didn't want to.
He didn't want to.
So he got to go to the principal, and we got to have that conversation next year when he came back because he didn't graduate.
I do remember those days when when everything was analog,
Yeah.
and the teacher would
Yeah,
call you up
add it all up,
and
say,
would
"Here
have
it
the
is."
grade book,
Yeah.
and they usually had like a sheet of paper that was cut out, so you just saw the line that had your
Yeah.
scores
you
on
just
it.
Can't show them the other scores.
Right, right. And,
Although
and-
everybody knows.
yeah,
Yeah.
everybody knew.
I remember when I was in grade school, our teachers would give us tests and stuff, and then they'd reestablish the seating chart based on the scores. So the person at the front of the first row
Was
was
the
the
A.
best score.
Yeah.
The one in the back left corner was the dumbest kid in the room, score-wise. That's not good educational technique.
No, that's very Rudolph Dreikers of him.
They don't use it anymore
No, I wouldn't think
that
so.
I know of. So.
Well, so to get back down into the weeds of this biology, if you're listening to this, then the plate, the graphic that I'm projecting here on the website, you will see, but you won't see us as we're talking about it. But this is
I like the way you're so clear.
yeah, I'm not being very clear. But so this graphic that you see up right now is a picture of the brain, and you can see that at the bottom of the brain is the brain stem, and that's where autonomic functions happen, like your breathing and your heart rate and things like that. You don't have to think about those things, right? You don't think about your heart beating or think about breathing while you're asleep. Those are parts of your autonomic nervous system. They happen automatically. Above that is this area called the limbic system, and that's where all the structures for emotions happen. So you have your amygdala and other structures in the limbic system. That's where emotions happen. That's where they're produced. That's where they're processed. And then above that, you have the cortex, and the cortex is where rational thought happens. And your brain operates where it gives the most resources to the most basic function as they are allotted. So
how do we know this?
how do we know this? Because if a person has damage to the cortex of their brain, they will oftentimes become irrationally emotional. So the limbic system continues to function even when the cortex doesn't. And
So
when
a person who has Alzheimer's, as they
Yes.
deteriorate in their cognitive
Right.
process and awareness, often have more primitive emotional releases.
Exactly.
Fear, rage. But how we know this is we can hook machines to the head that will measure
yes.
the electrical activity in the brain and the region in which that activity
these are unscripted, so I didn't know that that's what you were talking about. But yes, that is correct.
Well, it's all crystal
Yeah.
Bill.
But so when you have an emotion, right? That's involving the limbic system. So the limbic system is in overdrive. The more intense the emotion, the more resources that are going to the limbic system, which means those resources aren't available to the cortex. So you are designed biologically so that your emotions override your rational thought.
So do we know, is that just blood flow, or is that electrical stimulation? Is it both? Is it something else?
It's both. So blood
Okay.
will go more to the limbic system, but electrostimulation, because the neurons will be firing in the limbic system and not in the cortex.
Yes.
But it's designed that way so that you can initiate fight or flight, so because those are survival.
That happens instantly.
Exactly. Right.
Yes.
Right. And so the more intense that emotional reaction, the more resources go to the limbic system, the fewer resources available to the cortex. So telling your child to go do their homework after you've just had a horrible fight with them is usually it's not good advice, because they're not then able to think rationally and go do their
Or if
homework.
they're having a meltdown because their girlfriend just broke up with them, or because they didn't get chosen to be a cheerleader that day, then you can't say, "Oh, calm down and do your math work,"
Right.
because they're not going to be able to do it.
Right. Now, and you could say that, because that's why counting to 10 works.
Yeah.
So if if you're teaching kindergarten and you have a child who is having an emotional reaction, a lot of times the teacher will say, "Hey, Johnny, let's sit down and count to 10." Well, why does that work? Because counting to 10 is a rational thing. So if you can get them refocused on doing something rational, the emotion runs its
Making
course
them
and
think
dissipates.
about something.
Right. Right.
Like saying their ABCs backwards, or what's the times table
Right.
for 4 or 6 or 9. If they can concentrate on that, they start to calm their body down.
Right.
I was having a conversation with my son the other day, the one that's an engineer, about,
He is brilliant. Your son is freaking brilliant.
yeah, but we don't like to tell him that.
Okay. Okay. Well, Spencer, if you're listening to this, I didn't say that.
But we're talking about exactly this issue of the physiology and the surge of emotional intensity. And I was telling him, you can learn, you can train, like to raise the temperature of your hand or lower the temperature of your hand. You can regulate the autonomic nervous system to a minimal degree, but you can do that. And if you can do that, then when you start to feel anxiety and it's starting to accelerate, you can calm yourself down. And so we talk about meditation. We talked about using ice cubes on your temples. We talk about taking showers. We talk about find something that works
Right.
for focusing you to slow down that anxiety, which is what we're talking about here,
Yeah.
so that the emotional flooding doesn't push you over the edge somewhere you don't want to go.
And I don't know if you've ever seen that demonstration with the hands.
I've done it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm not very good at it. I probably, if I practiced it, I could become better. But I remember the very first abnormal psychology class I ever took was with Dr. Gilner at St. Louis University. I don't think he's still around, but if he is, shout out to Dr. Gilner. And he would do that in class.
Yeah.
And you could walk up, I mean, everybody could walk up, and one of his hands would be flaming hot and the other one would be cold as ice.
Yep.
Now, I don't know if that was a circulation problem and he just was doing that as, but I think that,
Well, you do
there
know.
is
You know it's doable, and you know he did it.
He did it, and
Yeah.
and it's amazing when you see it happen.
It's stunning.
Yeah.
Well, the closest that I've come to doing that with a classroom set is get a pan of hot water and a pan of cold water and have them put their hands, one hand in each, for 3 minutes, and then switch them. Or pull them out and feel them, hot, one cold. You're talking about the sensors, hot, cold, touch, pain, that are in the skin level of the body. But that's an external thing. What we're talking about is an internal
right.
thing for regulation and control. The point being, if you can learn to regulate some aspects of the surging, then you can avoid the meltdown. You can see it coming. You can learn, these are my triggers. And we laugh about it in some of our conversations. So many places now have trigger warnings.
Right.
And college professors are expected to have trigger warnings on their syllabus.
Right.
On this day, we're going to talk
Right.
about sexual abuse. If you have a sexual abuse history, you may want to not come to class that day, or you want to prepare yourself for that discussion. Go away in your mind somewhere if this is going to set you off, because we don't want to set you off. We don't want you to have those reactions. But if you're taking this course, we have to cover this material.
Right.
And so, same thing in therapy. When you're doing therapy with people that have chronic problems of loss of control of physiologically triggered things, are there ways that we can foreshadow that and regulate it and diminish it? So if I know I have trouble with surging anxiety, we talk about people with trauma histories, their baseline resets so that they
Right.
they have less wiggle room but
Right.
more tolerance.
Right. And what the research shows us on that, when we look at the biology of that, is that trauma actually creates an imprint on your actual neurons early.
Yes.
And that then primes you for that kind of experience in the future. It's amazing.
It's
some
like
of the
one
research
trial
that's
learning.
been done. Yeah.
Something that happens when you're 4 years old and maybe never happens again until you're 30. But when it happens at 30,
Right.
your brain automatically
Right.
goes to the place that it went to,
And
you try to cope the way that you coped at 4.
And so you can have one trial learning with what we're talking about is post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
You can have one trial learning with that, but then the research also shows that chronic stress or trauma over a long period of time has the same cumulative effect as that one trial learning. So just trauma in
Reset
general.
the baseline.
Yeah.
So this all comes back to one of the chapters that we wrote in the book that deals with emotional regulation. And the conversation evolved out of the idea that when you're trying to figure out how to do appropriate emotional regulation, sometimes you lose control.
Right.
Sometimes you have road rage or other rage, and you behave in a way that gets you in real trouble, danger, relationship, job, police, what have you. And you end up in therapy because the judge said, you can go to prison or you
Right.
can go to therapy. And here we are. And you say, well, that's just the way I am. Well, that's not an excuse for the way you're going to be,
Right.
or else you're going to be constrained.
Well, in a previous episode, you talked about this idea of having the conversation with your client about engaging in the behaviors that lead them to be the person that they would choose to be.
Yes.
And this is a part of that.
Well, and it's a conversation about foreshadowing. How can we foreshadow a circumstance that typically ends up with you getting out of control, and let you rehearse that in a safe environment, in a safe holding space, where if you lose it and you start cussing, nothing bad's going to happen right here.
Right.
But if you do it with your boss, you can lose your job. And then you can't make your house payment. Then all that stuff just escalates. And you want to say, well, it's not my fault. Well, it's maybe not fault. Let's talk about responsibility.
Exactly.
Words matter. Let's change the script in your head, and let's give you empowerment. So a way that I try to make that point to clients is I teach them the difference between the word responsibility, responsibility, and responsibility, 2 words. I have the ability to respond in whatever way I choose, or I have the responsibility, which is I'm locked in. I have to do this. I have to be responsible for my child's safety. Well, I can respond in different ways to make my child safe. One has power, one has fault.
Right.
So let's change what you hear in your head. Won't use the power dynamic. So that's pretty much what I have to say today.
Thank you very much for that intellectual conversation. That was very elucidating.
Well, it's about therapy, and it's about doing good therapy and understanding how clinicians approach it, but also as a client, what should I be looking for in a skill set for a clinician? If I come in with this problem and I'm overwhelmed, and someone has said, go to therapy, I come sit down and I look at you and I'm, so are you going to fix me? How are you going to fix me? Well, this is how.
This is how. The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue, and if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike. I'm going to leave all this in. All this is going in. All this between talk.
Yeah, all right. Works for me.
So don't say any curse words.
Oh, shit.
I just said don't say any curse words. Yeah. All right.